Well, hey there. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Jules and I'm building a fantasy cottage. Oh, what's that? Whose fantasy, you ask? Well, mine, of course. We just met. I don't even know your name yet. You wouldn't expect me to know your fantasies, now would you? Honestly, that would be a little creepy, wouldn't it? But no worries. I would love to get to know you better. We'll take it slow. Let's just be friends. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments below and tell me about your dream home. Okay, so full disclosure, I'm a little bit of a liar. I just gave you this whole speech about how this is my fantasy home, and that's not really true. The idea for this build did start out because I was imagining what my ideal home would be like. But as I went along, it kind of turned into an entirely different story. Now, to be fair, it is still half my dream home. The exterior definitely still qualifies, but the interior isn't quite what I'd imagined. I guess that's because I built this house the same way I start all of my builds, which is basically just to place a bunch of random shapes and then play fill in the blanks, adding interior walls and furniture wherever it seems to make the most sense. In this case, what I ended up with were some smaller and somewhat awkwardly shaped rooms, in particular the kitchen and bathroom. But honestly, I think that works out really well for this build. I've been in several older homes over the years, and they do tend to have some unusual or awkwardly shaped rooms, specifically any rooms with plumbing, for whatever reason. One thing that I absolutely knew I wanted this house to have were some lovely cottage gardens. I started the gardens with some randomly placed stone paths, the idea being that these paths would lead to different spots among the flowers. A place to sit and enjoy a cup of tea perhaps, or maybe a bird bath or feeder to encourage friendly pollinators. The process of placing the flowers was long and tedious. It reminded me of why I don't currently have a cottage garden in real life. It can take years for a cottage garden to reach its fully established beauty, and it definitely felt like it took years to get all of the flowers placed for this build. In just a few moments, you'll see me start to work on window placement. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably run into the same problem I found myself facing, at least occasionally. I couldn't seem to find the perfect placement both inside and outside for some of the windows. Specifically, I was having a really hard time with the front kitchen window. It definitely didn't make sense to put a window behind the stove, but my only other option was to have a window a little too close to the adjacent window and completely off center. Aesthetically, this drove me crazy. So I did what I had to do. That's right, I cheated. I put this window in the best place for the interior, and then I used a bunch of wall climbing ivy to cover up the placement of the window from the outside, so you'd never know by just looking at this build. Lucky for me, this house is completely perfect for such a cover-up. I already knew that I'd be placing climbing vines somewhere on the outside of this house. The window dilemma simply made the decision of where exactly to place them for me. You may find that there is a creative solution like this for window placement in many different types of builds, but I have certainly rearranged entire rooms just to make the window placement more acceptable as well. Another thing that was necessary in order for this build to even come close to meeting my criteria of a dream home was an outdoor water feature of some kind. A pool simply didn't make sense, so I went with a pond instead. I like to imagine that on hot summer days, the inhabitants of the cottage like to cool off by taking a swim in their own private pond. Although, of course, we all know that Sims can't actually swim in ponds. Now, I'm not complaining. Okay, so I am complaining, but with the added acknowledgement of something to be grateful for. So it pretty much balances itself out, right? I absolutely love that a pond tool has been added to the game. I think it opens up a world of build possibilities. My personal favorite being an excuse to build footbridges. Emphasis on foot, of course. However, I do think it's really weird that Sims can't swim in the ponds. They can swim in narrow rivers within the world, so why not in wide open ponds on their own lot? I love the concept of a sim who's living a self-sufficient lifestyle, being able to fish in their own pond on their own land. I just want them to be able to swim on their own lot as well. And frankly, there are very few builds that I can think of where it would make any sort of sense to have a pond and a pool on the same lot together, except for maybe a koi pond. Okay, now, as long as we're airing grievances, let's talk about glitches. Fence glitches, that is. I have no idea what was happening with the fences while I was building this house, but I had to restart my game and reset everything multiple times. Every time I would place a gate anywhere, sections of the fence would disappear completely, and I couldn't get them back. The post would remain, but the entire middle section was gone. I would place a gate on one section of fence, and there would suddenly be multiple missing panels in the fence on the other side of the lot. All of this restarting my game and rebuilding fences was super frustrating and made the build take much longer than it needed to. I managed to find a short video that showed how to fix this glitch. You basically just slide the gate along the fences and the missing panels should reappear. But when I tried this, it just made every panel that the gate touched disappear as well. I'm curious if anyone else has had this problem with fences and gates recently, and if so, have you been able to find a permanent fix for this issue? Here I am starting on the cottage gardens that I mentioned earlier. While it did take forever to complete these gardens, and making them was definitely not the most fun I've ever had playing The Sims, I think the end result is quite beautiful. The hardest part about creating these gardens for me was honestly the pathways within them. Placing footpaths is one of the things I personally struggle with the most in builds. They always seem to look awkward, unnatural, or just completely disjointed. They always seem to be too wide or too narrow, too light or too dark, or they just don't seem to follow a natural path for foot traffic. Some small things that I've started to use as a solution to this problem include placing garden lights along where I'd like the path to be, and then deleting them once I have the path in place, or just placing dots from one area of the lot to the other, and then playing a little game of connect the dots to fill in the path. This plan is of course not 100% foolproof, but it has helped me out quite a bit. Now, let's chat about the interior, shall we? I pretty much knew the vibe I wanted for the kitchen going in, and despite going through some color changes, I did stick with the original concept for the most part. I went for this sort of cottagey, almost grandma chic feel. I really wanted the cottage vibes to carry beyond decor style and actually give you the feeling of a specific lifestyle. Of course, the decor isn't functional in reality, but I still pictured someone growing fresh herbs in old tea containers next to their stove and hanging flowers and herbs from their garden for later use. I guess I do seriously overthink these completely irrelevant little details, but that's just how my brain works. In the end, I was very happy with how the kitchen turned out. It just feels really natural and lived in to me. And then I moved on to the living room, and I was suddenly questioning all of my minor life choices. For most of my builds, I often decorate the living room first, and it's usually in a very eclectic style. I admit that I'm not great at identifying decor styles, with the exception of a few obvious ones. I just put things together that, at least in my opinion, complement each other well. I do this in real life too, and somehow it just works out. Lots of thrift store and flea market finds, mismatched woods, various textures and fabrics. It's all very eclectic, leaning towards boho, and maybe that's the thread that ties it all together. Yet, no matter what I did, that style just would not work for this build. There was no rope, let alone thread, that could possibly tie it all together. Eventually, I just completely gave up on having a couch or love seat at all. I just couldn't make it work with the floor plan. So I finally decided to go with a couple of chairs surrounding the fireplace instead. This is when I started to picture who might actually live in this house. I came to the realization that it absolutely had to be an older couple living out their golden years on the small farm they've recently purchased after years of hard work. That small bedroom downstairs, well, that's there for the times, however infrequent, when their only grandchild comes for a visit. It was around this time that I also resigned myself to the fact that the whole house was meant to be cozy and old fashioned. This just isn't an eclectic house at all. It is, after all, a cottage, so a cottage it would be. Now, no cottage homestead would be complete without a chicken coop. I've had my own very small flock for the past few years, and I honestly can't remember life without them anymore. I also love my little vegetable garden. The unfortunate reality is that I haven't ever really been able to physically tend to my garden the way that I'd like. So, over the years, I've had to downsize the garden, and a lot of it has ended up in containers. But this isn't real life. This is The Sims. And I did say it was a fantasy. Of course, I did also say that it's not exactly my fantasy anymore. But I'm absolutely certain that the elderly couple who live in this house have no arthritis or other age-related ailments that could make gardening difficult. Bending down to weed the garden? No problem. Bad back? What's that? But that extra sneaky woohoo tonight just might be the death of you. Oh yes, The Sims, where dreams really do come true. I did give them a little extra help by putting the chicken coop in with the garden plots. Fortunately for our older couple, Sim chickens don't eat or tear up your crops. I personally love this. It's completely unrealistic, but some real life things would just make the game very frustrating. I personally think a balance of realism and fairy tale makes for the best Sims experience. I like that I'm free to pretend that the chickens are nearby to help with weeding, tilling, and garden prep between plantings, but they wouldn't dare destroy a plant that your sim actually wants, because, in the game at least, they won't. I didn't intend to play in this house, but now I kind of can't wait. There really is something fantastical about it. It's the perfect type of build, to me at least, for those times when you want to play The Sims as an escape from reality. I hope you enjoy this video. If you do, please hit that like button. I would love it if you'd subscribe. Stay tuned for more content coming soon, and have a beautiful day.